Alrighty, today we're going to be learning about the facial bones of the human skull. Starting first and foremost, there are a few bones that make up the front here. Actually, there's quite a few bones, but we'll start with the basics here. And this first bone here in the front, the biggest one, is called the frontal bone. That should be pretty easy to remember because it is the front-facing bone. If you're looking at somebody from the front, that's the first bone. You're going to notice the forehead. So the frontal bone is the biggest bone on the face from the front view. There also is a couple other bones that make up this part of the face. So here we also have the zygomatic bone. So the zygomatic bone is actually your cheekbones. So if you can remember, zygomatic equals your cheekbones. Those are the parts that stick out the most and make the cheeks when you smile. We also have something here called the maxilla. And there are two M's on the mouth. That's pretty easy for you to remember. So maxilla, I always remember because it's max above. And then this here is the mandible. You speak with the mandible. This bone moves up and down, helps you chew. And then on the other side here, we have the nasal bones. These do make up the inside of the nose. And there are two parts that meet together here for that. Let's see here, we're missing a couple things. So we have the temporal bone. It's sticking out just to the side here. You can get a better view here on the temporal bone, but I just wanted to show you this perspective. And then here, let's see, we have the vomer. Vomer makes up the lower half of the nasal cavity right here. It's kind of hard to see, but it's this little guy right here. And then we do have a couple bones in the inside of the nose. There is a really small one right here. It's right there. I'm going to highlight it for you. This bone is called the lacrimal bone. This one is a little trickier for me to remember, but I just remember that it's adjacent to the nasal bone. And then there is a big bone. I'm going to erase some stuff here just so you can see. We know where nasal bone is now. This big bone, there's a big bone that spreads in the inside of the skull, and that is called the sphenoid bone. It's easier to understand what that looks like if you look at a brain, like a skull split, and you can see like the inside perspective or from an under posterior view, because it is a little hard to visualize, when it looks like this. And so on, we're going to do a couple more things that are just like little things that you might want to remember about the front of the facial bones. There are a couple of foramens and like other little things that I try to remember as well. So first there is, I'm going to go ahead and erase so we can get through this a little bit easier here. Don't worry, I have something to erase. Okay. Okay, so this, you see these little holes here? There are 3 sets of them right there. This is the supraorbital foramen. I remember this because super is above. This is the highest one. And this is inferior to that, so that is the infraorbital foramen. We also have one more, and that is the mental foramen. So those 3 foramens make up parts of the face, and then there is also one more thing that we're missing here, 2 more actually. So this flat area of the frontal bone is called the squamous area. Frontal bone. Sorry, my handwriting's a little crazy. And there's also something right here. So in this drawing, it shows like a crack, almost like a squiggle in between the eyebrows, but it's actually called the glabella. And this glabella here is actually just the flat innermost portion between the eyes or in between the eyebrows. So that is the glabella. All right, so that's pretty much the basics for this side of the face. But we go to this view over here. The side profile shows a little bit more that we couldn't really see with this frontal view of the face. So we do have a couple things over here, but we're just going to go back over that we saw on the other side. So we have the frontal bone here once again. That one's a little bit easier. It's the front of the face, the frontal bone. But then we do have a bone here that we didn't mention in this top portion. These are called the parietal bones, and I say these because there are one half and a second half in the brain, parietal lobes, you know. So that's parietal. And then we do have another bone that does sit in the very far back of our brain, and that is called the occipital bone. If you think about the brain, there is an occipital lobe. It is located beneath the bone. So if you know the innards of the brain, it makes it a little bit easier to understand the bones. And then here we have this, we did see the temporal bone in this part, this front view here, but this is a really good view of the temporal bone right here. And if you want to remember, that's your temples. So you can feel the indentation on the side of your face here, as well as when you feel your cheekbones. This is also the zygomatic bone. And we also have the nasal bone right here. So these are things we kind of already went over a little bit, but there are a couple things, especially in the lower half of the face. So here we have a couple of things going on, and it's pretty hard to see, but they're pretty small. So here, right here, we have the mastoid process of the temporal bone. If you feel behind your ear, you can feel the mastoid process of your temporal bone. This part sticks out right behind the ear, and as you can see, there's a little hole here, and this is actually the canal. So this is the external acoustic medius. This is where you get your sound coming in through. External acoustic medius. So the ear would be popping off the outside of this. This is the inside. And then there is a little tiny piece hanging off right here, and that is called the zygomatic process. So I'm going to erase this just so we can get back to what we were looking at here, just to make it a little easier on us, because we're going to learn a couple more things. So this is our zygomatic process. It's easier for me to remember process because I think of pencil, zygomatic process. And there are a few things on the jaw portion or the mandible portion or mandible portion here. Let's see. So we have the little connecting point here where it connects to the zygomatic bone, or I mean the temporal bone, excuse me. The mandibular condyle is the name of that. And then we also have this angle here. This makes the lower half of the jaw. You can feel it when you move. And that is the mandibular angle. All right. So we have learned pretty much everything there is to know about the facial bones. There are a couple key points that I just want to go back over that I struggle remembering. And I'm going to erase everything just so we can see them once again. So, you know, there are some pieces that really stick out with the facial bones that make it a little bit easier for you to remember what those traits are. So we're just going to go back over them again. So this here, you can remember acoustic is sound. So this is the external acoustic medius. I think it's actually said meatus because it's spelled that way. And then we also have the zygomatic process. And when we talked about that earlier, I said processes. I just remembered that those are things that stick out. And you can remember because it comes off of this bone here. And then there are a couple things I want to show you again. We talked about our foramens that were in the facial bones here. They also show and project on the side portion of the face. So we do have the super for supraorbital. And then we have the inferior or infraorbital. And then right here, we have the foramen, the last one here, and that one is the mental foramen. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And then the last part right here is the mandibular symphysis. I don't know if I brought this one up earlier, but that's why I'm going back over my notes. And mandibular symphysis is actually the flat portion here of the mandible. And there also is something similar at the top called the glabella, and that is in between the eyebrows as well. Yeah. And I did forget to mention one thing that's pretty important, and I love this part of the facial bones. And there are fibrous connections of the bones, and those are called the sutures. So there are a couple, and you can see them best in this view right here. But this top one here, there's one that goes across the top of the brain. You can also see it here. And that one is called the coronal suture. I best remember that because of a crown. You know, like a little crown on the head. He's a king or she queen, whatever. So the coronal suture is this first one here. And then we have the squamous suture. Now these all kind of look squamous. You know how squamous has irregular edges and things like that. But this here on the temporal bone is the squamous suture of the temporal bone. I'm going to write this one again just so you can remember. And then we also have another suture, and this one is called the lambdoid suture. So this one lays in the back of the brain here, and you would think that this one would have something to do with this bone, but it's actually right here, and it's got its own little special name called the lambdoid. And then we also have a part of the bone right here. This comes off of the back of the occipital bone and meets with the temporal bone. And this one is called the osteomastoid suture. So these all end in the word suture, obviously, but I just wanted to show those because those are probably my favorite part of the facial bones, is just showing where they meet together like puzzle pieces. So I know that this video was probably not the best view of everything, but this is all I had to work with here. So that is the completion of our facial bones. So I hope that this helps, and you're gonna ace your test.